everybody. Welcome to season 2 of our Family Church podcast. So glad that you're joining us on the podcast. And Felipe, we made it another year.
We made it, the second year. Welcome, guys. Welcome back. We're super excited to be here. Last year, we had an amazing season, a great episode about sports ministry. A lot of churches trying to get to understand how we can leverage sports and the church. It was beautiful.
Yeah, we focused last year on Family Church, what we do, why we do it. And like you said, that one on sports went viral, right?
It did.
So this year, our focus is different. This year, we're just talking about the church in America. And here's an important part about this podcast. This is not a leadership podcast. We really want this podcast to be seen by church members. And what I'd love to see in this podcast is church members going up to pastors and going, hey, we get it. We're on board. What can we do? How can we help you? And we're trying to equip the church, and probably more than pastors. Pastors know what they should be doing. Well, a lot of times they struggle getting it done because the church isn't on board. And so that's why our people watch this. They send it to their friends. And this year we're going to talk about things like, how are we doing post-pandemic? What lessons did we learn in the pandemic? What are the best ways for the church to engage the culture? We're going to look at political figures. We're going to look at cultural figures, people who have their hand on the pulse of the culture. And we're also going to look at the challenges and opportunities facing the church today.
Yeah, and one episode will be dedicated to technology in general, but focusing on AI. I've been spending a few years studying technology. I spent 18 years of my life developing technologies. I've been spending a few years with Harvard University studying AI, and now is the time
you're
to
at
share.
Harvard right now.
I'm finishing last mile.
That's
Thank
it.
God.
So today we're going to kick off season 2 with, I think, the best person we could interview on this. He's one of the leading guys who really understands the church in America, and that is Sam Rainer. Let me just introduce, and then Sam, you can say some more about yourself. Sam's the pastor of West Bradenton Church here in Central Florida, a great church, multi-site. They have 2 campuses. They have 2 languages. And doing some great things there. Sam's also the president of Church Answers University.
Amazing.
Church Answers resources pastors all around the world. I was able to be a part of it for a season, and just thousands and thousands of church leaders around the world go through Church Answers. And we'll put a link in the show notes to Church Answers so people can go there if they want to find out more. Sam is the author of 9 books.
Wow.
He and his wife, Erin, have, and I still don't know how you talked her into it, but have 4 children. And you ready for this? I've known Sam since he was 8 years old. Aww. We've known each other for 35, 36 years. I went on staff. His father, Tom, was the pastor, and we served 2 churches together.
This is amazing. Sam, I would love to hear from you some stories about Chuck.
No, wait. He can't tell anything about me because I know too much about him. No, okay,
you probably know something about Chuck.
We could both get ourselves in trouble. So, Sam, share a little bit that we didn't get and what's going on in your life right now.
Well, it's a good season of life. Yeah, 4 kids. I feel like a ping pong ball sometimes, bouncing around, getting them to wherever they need to go. But as you mentioned, I'm a pastor. I do some business on the side. And I guess maybe one thing that you didn't mention is I am a huge Tampa Bay Rays fan.
Yes, you are.
and Lightning as well.
Yes.
So we'll see what they do in the playoffs. I know at the time of this recording, the hockey playoffs haven't started yet. So I'm really looking forward to this next. I love this time of year. You've got baseball and hockey on at the same time.
Yeah, and you see, I love when we're recording this, the Masters is about to come up. So, man, to put baseball and the Masters together for me, and
that's golf. Is that golf?
Yeah, just thought I'd let you know. All right.
Okay.
So, Felipe, why don't you ask Sam the first question, and then we'll just see where it leads us.
Right. Sam, could you please give us a overall idea? How do you see the church in America today? Kind of giving us something like what we're doing that is good and what is alarming. How do you see the church scenario in America today?
Well, let's start with the most alarming thing. What's alarming to me is the lack of evangelism. and how few churches are actually participating in the work of the Great Commission. There are a lot of churches that fund missions, which is good, you should. And there's a lot of churches that I believe they understand what the Great Commission is. But very few churches have an ongoing evangelism emphasis. In fact, some of the research that we've done at Church Answers shows that only 1% of churches in America have an ongoing evangelism emphasis. They may have an event or kind of one thing at one time, but in terms of we're doing this regularly and we're training our people to do it, only 1% of churches have an ongoing evangelism emphasis. So to me, there's lots of things that could be said about how unhealthy the church is in the United States, and in many ways it is unhealthy. But the most alarming thing is our lack of an outward focus, our lack of outreach, and specifically our lack of evangelism. Now, what's something the church is doing well? I think that there are many churches who are beginning to understand their context a little better. And I think that's necessary. We're breaking out of this whole cultural Christianity season, and churches are realizing that they can't just thrive on existing believers to transfer into their church. In fact, a lot of the church growth the last 30 years has been transfer growth. There are times and places to leave your church, of course, but we're kind of running out of people to transfer at this point. From one church to the next. And so I think a lot of churches are at least asking the question, okay, we have a neighborhood to reach. Who's here? And that's something that we do at Church Answers as well, through our demographic reports, actually, is to help churches to even understand who's in the neighborhood. And a lot of churches don't. But many are waking up to that reality. And I think a lot of churches are realizing that they have to understand their context in order to not just thrive in the future, but survive.
So we both know that this is true, the lack of evangelism. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, that's a good question and a big question. I think the biggest reason is we stopped training people in the 80s and 90s. So we had these evangelism programs and, Tuesday night visitation, Monday visitation, whatever the night was. It wasn't Wednesday night, it wasn't Sunday. I guess it could have been Sunday night, but typically it was Monday or Tuesday night. And a lot of those programs were good for the season. Some of them never really worked. And a lot of churches, when the season of that kind of evangelism, door-to-door evangelism, knocking on doors, which we still do at West Bradenton, by the way. We just don't do it the way that it was done past. But when that season ended, churches canceled the program, but they didn't continue with evangelism training. Basically the idea was, well, this isn't really working and nobody's showing up for it anymore. So let's just kill it. And, every program has a season, but evangelism is supposed to be ongoing. And so the last 20, 30 years, churches haven't trained people on evangelism. And when you don't train people and when you don't do it, people aren't going to do it naturally. So you've got a whole generation of people who never really got training from the church on how to do evangelism. And if you don't know how to do it, you're not going to do it. So I think one of the biggest things that happened was we canceled some programs, which maybe they should have been canceled, but we didn't replace them with anything else. And because of that, we're reaping what we sow.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, we'll see over a couple hundred people baptized this year, but for us, it's built into the messages on evangelism. I mean, we say we want to help people believe in God. So that's salvation. That's evangelism. To belong to the family, that is community and ministering to each other, and then to live beyond yourself. So that's mission and that's outreach. But what we have found incredibly effective is two things. Number one, every time we have a baptism, the next week we show it on video in all of our services. People will do what you celebrate, right? And so every week they're seeing baptisms up there from one of the campuses. And then secondly, what we have started doing recently is the person responsible for leading them to Christ does the baptism. Mm-hmm. And so that's affirming their part in that. And so it's been really neat to see that. So you wrote a book on church membership. What did you put in there that addresses this issue of equipping for evangelism?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And it's part of our covenant in our church that you would share. Whatever word you want to use for the action of, doing the Great Commission is fine with me. But yeah, the book, Basics of Belonging, really spells out, kind of what it means to be a part of a church, why you should have high expectations of your members, and exactly what they should be doing. So I think one of the things that we've done in the church, again, over the last 30, 40 years, is we've lowered the bar of expectations of our people when we should have been raising the bar of expectations. Now, I'm not advocating for legalism, of course. The guilt is a terrible motivator, and every pastor knows that. I mean, you can get up into the pulpit on a Sunday and complain that giving is below where it should be, and guess what? You're going to get a higher offering for a week, maybe two, and then it's going to revert back to where it was. So guilt is not a very good motivator for people. So I'm not talking about legalism, but I do think that the American church suffers from too low of expectations. So part of what the book is about, and part of what we try to do at our church, is to raise the bar of expectations, not just in the area of evangelism, but all areas of the faith and all areas of discipleship. I mean, if you've got your guys memorizing sabermetrics for baseball fantasy teams, they can memorize scripture.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I just think that we have assumed that people won't or can't do what's required of them in the church, and so let's just lower the bar. And in doing so, you get what you set yourself up. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if we expect more, people will live up to that. And will some people be weeded out because they don't want the high expectations or the standards? Well, certainly that's the case. But there is actual data and there's studies, and I won't bore everyone with which studies and which scholarly journals and all that, but there's plenty of studies out there that show, it's called the Institutional Theory of Strictness, if you really want to know. There are studies that show that the more expectations you put on people and the higher the standard, the more likely they are to stick in a group, whatever that group is. And in our case, it's the church. So raising the bar of expectations actually helps churches reach and retain their people.
Kind of sounds like what Jesus did, right? I mean, he raised the bar. And let me also say, if you're watching this and your church doesn't have a formal membership process, Sam's book would be excellent. Where do they find that, Sam?
Yeah, you can find all of the resources at churchanswers.com.
Okay, excellent.
The complete membership class toolkit, if anyone is interested, at churchanswers.com.
So what would you say, what did the pandemic expose, and what have we learned from the pandemic that you think there are churches actually making changes? Now, raising the bar is one of those, but what else would you say the pandemic exposed? And so what's the challenges of that, and what do you think maybe some churches have learned and are doing well?
Yeah. Concerning the pandemic, let me first just say this. The fact that we were disrupted for a couple of years really shouldn't surprise us when you look at world history. And it's not easy to track what happened 100 years ago. But if you look at the 1919 pandemic, 1920 pandemic, I might have a year off there. But what you find in the source data is it took people about 2 years to get back to some sort of normal routine. So we're just now kind of getting back into the swing of things following a global pandemic. And, perhaps some people think that we should have done more with the pandemic. Perhaps some people think we should have done less. Regardless, it happened. And people are just now getting back into things. So what happened with the pandemic was the things that were already in place were exacerbated and accelerated. So whatever trend was there leapt forward 5 years. So if your church was on the decline, you leapt forward with your decline 5 years. If you had some disunity issues in the church, those were exacerbated as if you left them unattended for 5 years. So the pandemic didn't necessarily create any new problems. because we've kind of returned back to where we were, as we do after every pandemic. A couple years, kind of back to the way things were. But what it did was it exacerbated and accelerated existing problems. And that exacerbation and that acceleration caused a tremendous amount of headaches for pastors. And there are plenty of pastors who genuinely suffered through this pandemic as their churches kind of fell apart. So if you're on the other side of this and you're actually doing okay as a church, you should really celebrate that.
Yeah. So, Felipe, share a little bit about, because Sam said it exposed some things and moved things forward 5 years.
You did.
Talk about our online ministry and what we learned when the pandemic hit.
Well, it was a surprising, but at the same time, it was a nice thing because we're gathering resources to make our online experience better. Like how we can make it sound better, how can we make it look better? And we're discussing this at the coffee shop we have here nearby, and then starting to making plans, and then the pandemic hit us. I used to be worship leader, and then I was immediately replaced, and then I jumped into my tech role. That is the second side of my doings, and that kind of changed the whole culture around the church. We grew an engagement online.
Yeah, when we first jumped into that, we had people texting saying, I can't hear anything.
I know.
And here was the crazy part. We had other people going, well, I can hear.
It's just fine for me.
It was just so terrible. And we just looked before we came on. We had over, what was it, 500 or 600 people watch one of the 3 Windermere services Sunday, or devices. So we don't know how many people.
Yeah.
And if we were to add all the campuses and all of the, and add the website, there were probably 1,000 devices tuned into one of our services on Sunday.
The Easter on that year, we reached 9,000 people.
Well,
No,
but let's be honest, we were doing Facebook there and people could scroll.
Well, we were counting 2 people per device.
Yeah,
to be fair. Yeah.
So, so Sam, help me with this one, because here's what I believe. I think, this whole frequency issue, that before the pandemic, people were not attending as frequently as they were 20 years ago, right? So kind of what was the average frequency pre-pandemic?
So somewhere between 1 out of 2 and 3 out of 4.
Okay.
And what we've landed on is 1 out of 2 Sundays. So you've gone from, to make this a little more easy to understand, before the pandemic, you had people who would be there half the time to 3/4 of the time. That was a decent, you're a church member that showed up half the time to 3/4 of the time. 2 to 3 Sundays a month. Yeah. Now they've gone from 3 Sundays a month to roughly 2 Sundays a month. We're, now an active church member by just about any standard is there every other week. And that, in my view, and I'm a pastor, so I'm completely biased here, but I'm thinking that's not healthy at all. That's actually very unhealthy. And you're setting yourself up from a spiritual standpoint for some problems when you're only within the fellowship of the saints, half the time. But that's what happened. The trend was already down on what's called attendance frequency, but the pandemic made it even worse.
Yeah, I've got a theory, and y'all can do with it what you want. I think what the pandemic exposed that we were producing a pretty bad product, and we were expecting people to come just because they were expected to be there, tradition, and that the frequency has something to do with the product we're putting on the stage,
Take
right?
it for granted, yeah.
And I hate to call it that, but I think that's a part of it. We were lazy because people did come.
Yeah.
And I think, because, man, I've watched your services, it's well produced. It's not, you can tell people just didn't show up on the stage and go, what are we going to do today? You have prayed through this, you've practiced through this, Sam, and we're intentional about the messages we give. And I think the more we do, because look, the frequency at the parks hasn't dropped off, right? Yep. There are areas of our lives where frequency is the same it was, if not more. And so I do think that there may be something to that. So Sam, we're about to wrap up. What would you, if you were talking to the average person in the pew, and they have a heart for God, they have a heart for the kingdom, they have a heart for their church, what would you tell them and encourage them as far as their role in the church to see the kingdom advance?
Yeah, the thing that I encourage among my people outside of our, expectations of membership, just from a cultural standpoint, is to genuinely enjoy the people around you. Just genuinely enjoy the people around you, whether that be the people around you in the seats of the church, whether that be your neighbors in your neighborhood.
That's good.
And when you take the posture of, I am here on this earth to minister to others, selflessly and sacrificially, and I want to genuinely enjoy that process of serving others, it totally changes your perspective on everything. Every person has an address.
Yeah.
If you live in the United States, you have an address attached to your name. Well, guess what? That's your mission field.
Yeah.
The people around you are the ones that God wants you to reach. Why am I living where I'm living? Why am I where I am? Well, I mean, you could answer that question any number of ways, but the bottom line is that's where God wants you.
Yeah.
You're there until God tells you to go someplace else. That's where you are. So, there's a lot of things that you can prefer in church. There's a lot of things that you can demand of your church. Maybe you're right. Maybe your preferences are right for everyone else. Maybe your demands are correct, but that's not what's going to cause you to mature. So if I just had to give like this big kind of thematic encouragement to the general audience of church members that are listening to this, I would say, just genuinely enjoy the people around you.
Well, that's
the people that you're connected to in the church, and your neighbors in your neighborhood.
That's good. In fact, we're going to edit that out, and I'm going to preach on that and claim that I came up with it. Good job, Sam. Hey, dude, I so appreciate you joining us today. And yours is going to be the first in season 2 of Family Church Podcast. And so tell us in the audience, how can we pray for you and your church?
Yeah. Well, we're growing with a lot of young families. So we have a lot of young family issues, which is awesome. And so just pray that God continues to bless. Our church is actually in a really good place right now. We're very unified. We've got the growth, we've got the giving, and everything's where it needs to be. But man, just pray that our young families would raise their children in a way that honors God. And then personally, I still got one kid of my 4 that is not quite yet saved, my youngest, and we're expecting it soon. There's no issues there. But just pray that all of my children would live for Christ in everything that they do.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Amen.
Close us out, Felipe.
Of course. Thank you, Sam, one more time. Really appreciate your presence here with us. First episode. Thank you guys for watching this episode. We're going to be back with some exciting episodes for this season. I can't wait to...
By the way, share.
I was almost forgetting about that.
Okay.
Yeah, check. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So like he said, share, subscribe to all of our channels. We have everywhere. We have content everywhere. We have content Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, podcast, Apple Podcasts. We also have a Spotify podcast. So there's plenty of spaces, plenty of places you can go and subscribe. Get tuned into our
All right, until next time. Thank you, and thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.